It's when I start going through all these books, I'm like, oh my god, how have I read so many books like this quickly in the year? Audiobooks. That's how, Sophie. Last year, I really got back into reading, and it's currently the start of March, and I have already read 30 books this year. So I thought I would talk to you about the good ones, the bad ones, and the in-between ones. Hello, and welcome back. I've got a slightly different setup today, so let me know what you think of it. I also just want to address this. I hit my head on the car door when I was getting out of the car at the weekend. It's now Thursday. It looks much better than it did, so let's just ignore that for the moment and we're going to talk about books. Looking back at the books that I've read, the vast majority are actually audiobooks. So I use BorrowBox, which is linked to my local library, and that gives me up to 10 audiobooks at any one time, so you can reserve them if they're not available immediately. I also have an Audible subscription. I have just the £1 a month, which I think is £7.99. But I've got the physical books here and I'm going to talk you through them. This first one feels a bit like cheating because I started it in December, and it's 10, The Decade That Changed My Future by Ryland Clark. If I'm totally honest, I knew that this autobiography kind of covered the breakdown of his marriage, and so I was quite interested to hear about that. And I bought the audiobook on Audible, and Ryland actually reads it, and you'll see that I love an autobiography that's read by the person who wrote it. I did enjoy it, but I didn't love it, so I gave it 4 stars. Next up was a BorrowBox book, and it's Cat Lady by Dawn Porter. A colleague at work had read this, and so I put it on BorrowBox because it was available immediately. And it's a really zany book. I feel like Cat Lady isn't necessarily that good of a description of it, but it's about this woman who kind of has some massive changes in her life, and it's so funny. It's definitely one that is at least for teenagers, if not young adults. Like, children should not be reading or listening to this book. And again, this was a really good one and I gave it 4 stars. Next up, I listened to Midnight by Jacqueline Wilson, and again, this is another one that I borrowed on BorrowBox. I was a really big Jacqueline Wilson fan as a child, and so when I found out that loads of her books are on BorrowBox, I was just in my element. So I have kind of been working my way through favourites from when I was a kid, but Midnight is one that actually I didn't read as a child. Broadly, it's the story of this girl who I think is called Violet, and her kind of difficult relationship with her brother. It wasn't one of my favourite Jacqueline Wilson books, but again, it's geared towards children and it's not one that I have nostalgia for. Having said that, I did give it 4 stars, but it would be on the lower end compared to the previous 2 that I've talked about. Next up is another audiobook that I borrowed on BorrowBox, The Night Train by Matilda Woods. This was a one-sitting book. I think it was 20 or 30 minutes long, and it was just a sweet little kid story, and I did enjoy it, so I gave it 4 stars. I feel like that goes to show how many of these books are audiobooks, because we're now on to the first physical book that I read this year, and it is this one, The True Love Experiment by Christina Lauren. This is the second in the series. I think the series is called DNA Duo. I can't remember what the first one's called. I haven't read the first one, but I feel like you can read this as a standalone book. It was quite clear that there was some stuff that had happened before that obviously I wasn't aware of, but I did still really enjoy it. Ultimately, it's a romance, but I felt like as it went on, it got better and better. So I would definitely recommend trying this book, and I gave this one 4 stars as well. Next up is my first 5-star book review of the year, and it was The Flat Share by Beth O'Leary. This is another one that I borrowed from BorrowBox, and I just loved it. It was one of those ones that I found myself really wanting to listen to, and even if I only had like 5 or 10 minutes, I'd stick my AirPods in and just listen to it for a bit. It's a little bit cheesy, a little bit predictable, but I love that in a book, so I think that's why I gave it 5 stars. Next up, my second physical book of the year is one that my partner got me for Christmas, and it is this. This is The Appeal by Janice Hallett. So on the front it says, 1 murder, 15 suspects, can you uncover the truth? So it's a bit of an unusual book because, I don't know if you can see, but it's not written like a book. So it's all like emails and texts, letters, all sorts of stuff like that. There's text messages. So you kind of follow everything through, and it does take a little bit of getting used to, but once you are kind of into it, it's really easy to follow. What I would say about this is there was a lot of context. So obviously we know from the front cover, 1 murder, somebody's died, and it's not clear who that is until probably like halfway through the book, and you can kind of guess because they're talked about in the correspondence, and we don't actually see anything that they've said, if that makes sense. So you can guess, but a lot of it is just kind of context leading up to it, and I didn't like that so much. Having said that, I am intending to read another one of Janice Hallett's books, which is a similar sort of style. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I think, again, it's another one that kind of ramps up once you get through it. And if it hadn't done that, it would have been a 3-star, but I did end up really getting into it at the end. After that, it was a self-help book, first one on the list. So this was The 4% Fix by Karma Brown, and this was another one that was on BorrowBox, so it was free. And the idea is that you get an extra 4% in your day if you wake up earlier. That might sound crazy, and I completely understand that, because I'm very much, sleep is important to me. I don't want to be waking up at 5 in the morning to be, you know, drinking matcha tea or whatever it is. I really value my sleep. But I feel like this book was very much like, wake up an hour earlier, go to bed an hour earlier, and then you've got that hour at the start of the day to do what you want to do, not what you have to do. And it just made it seem really achievable, and it was very accessible, and I just thought it was a really interesting concept. And I did think to myself, you don't even have to do it as an hour, you could do it as half an hour. But it was a really interesting thing to hear about, and hear how Karma has implemented it into her life, and you know, how it could possibly work. So that was another 4-star book for me. Next up is A Pocket Full of Stars by Aisha Bushby. I loved the kind of blurb for this book. Essentially, it's about this young girl whose mother goes into a coma, and they have a bit of a strange relationship, and the girl kind of ends up, I don't want to spoil it, but she ends up kind of becoming more connected to her mum. And it's just such an interesting concept, and it's so heartfelt, I guess is the word. It was another one that I borrowed on BorrowBox, and it was available immediately. I think it was geared towards teenagers, possibly. So it was kind of more of an easier read, but I just loved it. It was so lovely. And I actually gave that one 5 stars. I think this next one is my first 3-star rating so far, but this is The Missing Diamonds by Annabelle Sammy, and it's another one that I borrowed from BorrowBox. This one is very much a children's book, and I think that was the issue for me, is just that it was too cheesy, too convenient. It was just too much. I think it was probably aimed at a younger audience than I could enjoy. So I gave that one 3 stars. I loved this next one. It's Lilibet, the Girl Who Would Be Queen by A.N. Wilson. This is another audiobook from BorrowBox, and another one that's aimed at children. So it came out for, I believe it was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, and it essentially tells the story of Queen Elizabeth II throughout her life up until she came to the throne. It was another fairly short audiobook, which was good, although I think it might have been a couple of hours, and it was just lovely. I just thought it was really nice, and I gave that one 4 stars. I think this is the first thriller so far. So this is Her Mother's Daughter by Jackie Walsh. It was previously released under a different title, I believe. But I bought this one, I think I got it from Aldi for like £3. And the story is basically about this lady whose mother has severe dementia and is living in a home. And the mum one day says, "I took you." And she's like, "Excuse me?" And so it's a question of, is it the dementia kind of causing hallucinations, or was the daughter kind of kidnapped? And it was a good book. I really enjoyed it. It's not one that I'm going to reread, so I'm going to give this to charity, and I gave it 4 stars. Next is another audiobook that I borrowed on BorrowBox, but it was 5 stars, and I loved it so much that I bought the physical version. So this is The Burnout Solution by Siobhan Murray. So it's another self-help book, and it's split into, is it 12 weeks? And there are different focuses every week, and I listened to this at a time when I really was struggling and feeling very burnt out. And I have to say, the fact that it starts with kind of explaining what burnout is and what causes it, it started off making me feel very validated, which was brilliant. And then once I'd identified that I was burnt out and felt validated, it then moves on to kind of the techniques and some ideas that you can use to try and kind of alleviate that. I felt like the tips were very practical, and it's not like stuff that you would never be able to do in real life. It felt to me that everything that was suggested in here was very achievable. And as I said, I bought the book because I thought the audiobook was so helpful, and I felt that it would be really helpful to just pick it up and flick through it if I need to. So I just picked up week 4, How Your Personality Contributes to Burnout. And actually, that's probably a very good example because it reminded me that I am a type A personality. And that means that I'm very perfectionist, basically, very detail orientated, and that can make you more prone to burnout. And so again, you know, that makes me feel a bit more validated that I get so burnt out so quickly because of my personality. So yeah, would definitely recommend this. Another BorrowBox listen, I got the first Secret 7 book by Enid Blyton. I really liked the Secret 7 as a child, and so I thought, you know what, I'll borrow the first one and see how I get on. Again, I think because of the time it came out and also the fact that it is a children's book, I think it was just too young for me, too convenient and too innocent, I suppose. So I gave that one 3 stars. Before I go on to the next book, which is another BorrowBox audiobook, take this as a note. If you've got a local library, they often do allow you to borrow audiobooks through an app as well. So by all means, sign up to your local library, get the app, listen to loads of audiobooks. Audiobooks are also a really accessible way if you feel like you haven't got time to actually sit down and read a book. It's great to just stick in an audiobook when you're doing whatever, really. I listen to audiobooks when I'm emptying the dishwasher, when I'm hanging up the washing, emptying the tumble dryer, doing housework in general, but also when I'm playing video games on my computer and I'm not necessarily bothered about listening to the music or the sound effects, I will often put a book in. So yeah, would definitely recommend audiobooks if you've never tried one before. And definitely sign up to your local library. So we're back to a 5-star book. This is Just Got Real by Jane Fallon. I borrowed this because it was available immediately on BorrowBox and it was so brilliant. It's kind of a like a cheating, you know, girl finds out guy's cheating on her type thing and teams up with the other girlfriends to take him down. That's kind of the general gist of it, but it's based on adult relationships and it is kind of a lot more mature in that sense. And so it was very funny, just brilliant, absolutely loved it. And as I say, I gave that one 5 stars. We're on to the next physical book now, and I can't remember if I mentioned in my 2023 books video that I'd read the first one of these. If you haven't seen that video, by the way, I'll link it at the end of this one. But I read The Housemaid's Secret, which is the sequel to The Housemaid, which is the same cover as this basically, but blue instead of red. Again, I don't want to cause any spoilers, especially for the first book if you haven't read it. It's amazing, by the way. But this is the same character as in the first book, who is a housemaid, and she goes to another family to be a housemaid. I think you probably could read this as a standalone if you wanted to. It's useful to have read the first one because there's kind of a subplot that almost kind of leads on from the first book. But as I say, I think the main plot, you don't have to have read the first book to understand what's going on. Another fantastic book by Frida McFadden, and I've actually got another one of hers on my to read, which is a separate series to this one. But yes, another 5-star read. And actually, the next one is a physical book as well, which is I'm Not Done With You Yet by Jessie Sutanto. I loved the idea of this book. So it's another thriller, and it's about a lady who has this obsession with somebody that she met when she was at university, and there's a split timeline, so you'll have a chapter of kind of present day and then a chapter from when they were at university together. It's about the lady kind of comes back across where the object of her obsession is going to be, and it's just, again, it's another one that took a little while to kind of properly get into it, but it was amazing, and there was a twist towards the end which was very interesting. This is another one that originally I thought was going to be a 3-star, but because it got better I ended up giving it 4 stars. My next audiobook was The Starter X by Mia Sosa. This, I believe, is an Audible exclusive and it's part of the Audible Plus catalogue. It's about this lady who, when she was at university, she used to date people and then be a terrible date so that they would break up with her and go out with somebody else. So it was like a manipulate-y, making somebody go for somebody else type thing, and she ends up falling back into it as an adult, but of course chaos ensues. It was okay. I mean, I gave it 3 stars in the end because it was, I mean, it was very cheesy and predictable, and I did think it was okay, but on balance, I mean, I'd probably have given it 3.5. Yeah, I just wasn't that bothered about listening to it really, so I gave it 3 stars in the end. After that was another Audible exclusive from the Plus catalogue, and this is Still Hung Up on You by Liz Maverick. This is another one that's got an interesting concept because it's basically a series of phone calls between a lady and a man. You can probably guess where that's going, but you know, no spoilers. So it's not a book structure, it's just as if you're listening into these few telephone conversations that they have, which again is quite interesting and something a little bit different. It's a bit shorter, so I think it's maybe 2.5 hours long. It was fine. I also gave this one 3 stars. Again, it's just something that I wasn't eager to listen to, but it was enjoyable enough. The next one is a physical book, but I don't have it with me because I gave it to charity, and it's Fashionistas Book 1, which is Laura. I have got all 4 of these books and I loved them as a teenager, so I'm just working my way back through them. Again, it was fine, I enjoyed it. I think Laura as a character is very immature at the start and very bratty, so it's kind of difficult as an adult to sympathise with that, but she definitely matures as time goes on, and it's another book that improves as you go, so I gave it 4 stars. And sometime later this year, hopefully I will get on to the second book, which I believe is Hadley. Next on my children's audiobooks that I've been listening to is Danny the Champion of the World by Roald Dahl. This is another one that I borrowed on BorrowBox, and I have heard of it as a book, but I had no idea what it was about. But it's a lovely, heartfelt book about the relationship between a boy and his father. Heartfelt, it was funny, it was probably one of the better Roald Dahl books that I've listened to recently, and I gave it 4 stars. It's when I start going through all these books, I'm like, oh my god, how have I read so many books like this quickly in the year? Audiobooks. That's how, Sophie. Next is another BorrowBox audiobook, and this is The Worst Sleepover in the World by Sophie Dahl. Again, it's a book that is aimed at people that are much younger than I am. I didn't enjoy it, I gave it 2 stars. And then moving from young to older, I next listened to The Time of Our Lives by Portia McIntosh, which was another BorrowBox listen. This is all set around the wedding day of this person, and our main character is one of their friends from university who they kind of haven't really kept in touch with, but they had like a group of friends at uni. One of them's getting married and all of them are kind of, you know, back together at the wedding. Again, there are heartfelt moments, funny moments, and I really enjoyed it, and I thought it was a really great concept as well actually, and so I gave it 4 stars. Next up, this was a physical book as well, and I was so excited to read this. It's Around the World on 2 Wheels by Peter, is it Jutlin? So it's the story of Annie Londonderry, who was the first woman to cycle around the world. And if you've been watching my videos for a while, then you might know that I went to see the musical Ride last year, which was also based on Annie's life. And my understanding is that this book was a big inspiration for that. This all happened, I think it was in the 1800s, so obviously there's not really many records, but Peter Jutlin is her like great nephew or something, and he has clearly put in a hell of a lot of time looking for old newspaper articles and all this sort of thing. So it was interesting, but I almost wanted more drama and less fact, and so for that reason I gave it 3 stars, and if you're interested in the story I would recommend going to see Ride because the music is top notch. Next is another BorrowBox audiobook, and this is The Boy Who Slept Through Christmas by Matt Lucas. I was in a queue for this book. I had to wait for such a long time, and I gave it 2 stars in the end. It just was not for me. It's a musical book, so obviously it's a book, but then there were songs kind of throughout, and obviously that's great for an audiobook. I don't really know how it works with the physical book, but it just, again, I don't know if I'm just too old of an audience for it, and it sort of felt like it was just going on and on and on. And I wasn't a big fan of the songs, and I just kind of listened to the end of it to get through it. And actually I was very grateful because it said I had like an hour left or something, and it turns out it was just like a Q&A with Matt Lucas. So I was like, skip that, I'm done. My next one is another audiobook. This is free on the Audible Plus catalogue. It's And Then She Vanished by Nick Jones. This is part of a series, and I'm so excited because I really enjoyed this book. It's the story of this guy called Joseph whose sister went missing like 20 years ago when she was like 10. And he then discovers that he has time traveling powers, and so it's kind of his intention is to go back and find out what happened and save her, but he's got to kind of get on top of his time traveling powers before he can do that. And it's it's really gripping. It was brilliant and I gave it 4 stars. Then we go on to another autobiography that is read by the author, and this is Paris, the Memoir by Paris Hilton. I'm not necessarily like a Paris Hilton fan, it's just something that I'd heard really good things about, and so I bought this on Audible. And again, it's read by Paris Hilton, and it's just kind of the story of her life really, but with a really big focus on some really horrendous ordeals that she went through as a teenager. It was so gripping, and it's really interesting because I remember when she was a big thing, like, you know, 15-20 years ago, and she was kind of the original it girl, and so it's really interesting to kind of flip it and see it from her perspective. So that was another 5-star listen from me. We're almost there. The next one is another audiobook. This one was a Borrow Box listen, and It Ends With Us by Colleen Hoover. This is a book that everybody has been talking about. I feel like I didn't really know what the story was, and to be fair, the blurb is not very clear, and there was like a little Q&A bit at the end where Colleen said that she specifically didn't want to be too explicit on the blurb as to what the story is about, which I kind of understand, but equally I don't really know how you sell a book without explaining what the story is about. Anyway, it wasn't what I was expecting, but I did enjoy it and it was quite gripping, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. And I have the sequel, which is It Begins With Us, which is the same story but from a different perspective. I've got that on Borrow Box, so I'll see what I think of that when it comes out in July, I think. The next one is another audiobook, but I actually bought this with like actual money in the Audible sale. It was like £3, I think. And it's My Great Escape by Portia McIntosh. And I've just twigged, I already listened to a Portia McIntosh book this year, didn't I? Yeah, The Time of Our Lives, that was the Portia McIntosh book. Huh, I'll have to look at some more of hers. So this is the story of a lady who gets dumped on national TV, long story, and then some flowers arrive on her doorstep and it says like, I want you back, sort of thing. And she's like, oh my god, which of my exes sent this? So she kind of goes on a journey to visit all of her exes. And again, it's just a really lovely, heartfelt kind of book. And I have to say that a big chunk of it is based on a cruise ship. And I don't know if you know this yet, but I'm going on a cruise later this year. Spoiler if I haven't already put the video up. So I feel like it made it extra special that I was listening to this book while I was booking my very first cruise and getting so excited about it. Maybe I'm a little bit biased because of that, but it was just another lovely story and I gave it 5 stars. And the most recent audiobook that I have finished is The No Show by Beth O'Leary, and again I got that one from Borrow Box. I was expecting to love this more than I did. So it's basically about this guy who misses 3 dates on Valentine's Day, and we hear from each of the women's perspectives. You're very much given one impression, and then later on it turns out that it's not what you think. And so it's a very interesting concept, but it did just kind of feel like it was trudging along and there wasn't really that much happening. Again, I didn't feel like I was like desperate to listen to it, so I ended up giving it 4 stars. And then the physical book that I finished last weekend is this one. This is The Host by Stephanie Meyer, yes, of Twilight-ness. I read this book when I was in my first year of university, and I remember it was really slow at the beginning, and I thought I'm going to give it one more chance. And then this is the bit when it all changes if you've read the book. So, and then I got hooked on it, and I haven't read it since. So that was probably about 10 years ago. So I sort of remembered vaguely what the kind of story was, but not in any great detail. And I really enjoyed reading this again, actually. It's one that I had to give 5 stars to because it's one that I could just sit with and just completely lose myself in. It was really easy to like binge read it, and I think as much as there's not a lot that happens for quite a long time in this, but I think again that kind of being able to lose myself in it was just brilliant, and I really enjoyed it. It's quite a decent length as well. I think it's like 600 pages. Yeah, about 630 pages, and this version has a bonus chapter in it, which I gather that this was meant to be the first in a series, but she never wrote the rest of the series. So I think the bonus chapter in here was meant to be like the first chapter of the next book, which is quite interesting because it doesn't end on so much of a cliffhanger. But yeah, this one was really good. And then just as a little bonus, at the moment I'm listening to Scythe by Neil Schusterman. That is an audiobook on Audible, and I got buy one get one free with my credits. So I bought that, and then I also bought another book, but it is absolutely amazing. It's such a good idea for a book. Would definitely recommend. And then the physical book I'm reading is this one, which is The Ballad of Never After by Stephanie Garber. This is the second one in the series. The first one is Once Upon a Broken Heart, which I read a few months ago, and I think I gave that one 4 stars, really enjoyed it. So this is the second one. Like I said, if you're interested in hearing about the books that I read and listened to last year, then I will put the link to that video here. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!